Committee meeting for December the 14th to order at this time. Ms. Only, if you'll call for attendance, please.
McBride,
Present.
Livingston,
Present.
Joe Walker,
Present.
Barron,
Here.
Newton.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Our next order of business is the approval of the minutes from November the 16th. They're found on pages 2 through 6. Need a motion?
I wasn't here, but I move for approval.
Is there any changes or anything we need to amend there? If not, Ms. Only, please call the roll.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Joe Walker,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Our next order of business is the adoption of our agenda. Mr. Brown, do you have any updates?
No requested changes.
Adoption.
Second.
Yes.
Just a quick question. Under the other topics, is there plan to be, or can there be, just an update on where we stand overall in terms of the planning process for the expenditures of the American Rescue Plan Act funds?
Sure.
Thank you.
I have a discussion too, one of the things that happening right now, I'm getting a lot of feedback from different groups in different counties who are in the process of getting funding from state and federal sources. And you may recall, we have not had anyone alive on our behalf in some time now. So I'd at least like to have a discussion about that, how, I don't want to leave here for the Christmas break and everybody else is getting all the funding from the state and federal legislature.
Yes, sir. We'll be glad to add that as a point of discussion. Anything else? If not, Ms. Only, please call for the vote for the adoption of the agenda.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston, Joe Walker, Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Point of clarification, Madam Chair. Did you add some things to this agenda then?
We did not add anything to the agenda. These are just, as I have received them, to bring to my attention as we talk about other topics, that they would specifically be, those items would be specifically
Thank you.
addressed. So our next item on our agenda is to talk about our incentive extension, and the object here that we want to talk about first is, Mr. Brown, I think that what would be most important is if we got an update for our initial pilot program, and then for the good of this body, I would like for us to discuss if we would like to extend, continuing to do incentives, whether it is as we've already started, or if there are any additional programs that we would like to implement. Mr. Brown?
Yes, members of the committee, county council. During the county administrator's report, I actually gave a breakdown of all the incentive activities that we participated in throughout the county. And we do have a few remaining gift cards available. But when the committee last took this item up, and I believe the council actually took action that spoke to this potentially being continued, but I think the chair wanted to be clear so that the committee and council would have an opportunity to weigh in on that there was the actual intent, is that once those items were depleted, that the staff could go back and provide additional incentive resources in the form of those $100 gift cards at future events that may be happening throughout the community. So, Madam Chair, at this time, certainly if the committee wanted to provide some clarity as to whether or not they wanted to extend that and be clear that that's what we were doing, and as a result of that, allowing staff to get additional gift cards as necessary for the events, we certainly would take that information and do the will of the body.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So at this point, I do want to open up for some discussion as to how we would like to proceed with the incentive programs. Ms. McBride?
Madam Chair, we have not exhausted the pilot project funds yet, right?
No,
Okay.
Mr. Brown, can you give us the exact number,
Remained in the balance.
the balance?
There are 38 $100 gift cards remaining.
How much is that?
So there's
3,800?
$3,800 worth of gift cards.
Okay, that's the remainder.
Yes, ma'am, which is, they're in $100 increments, so there would be 38. If you recall, we talked about virtual versus physical, and while staff had mentioned that providing virtual would allow us not to expend the funds unless we, kind of had to, but there was concern about individuals maybe not being able to have technology to access that, so we instead got physical cards, so that's why we have physical cards remaining in those amounts.
Madam Chair,
Do recognize Ms.
was that a part of our strategic plan that we discussed? Funding, the coronavirus funding that we received, the ERAP and all the different funds. Was that discussed in our strategic planning session at all?
No, ma'am.
I thought that we were going to have a strategic planning for how we were going to expend those funds.
Yes, ma'am. Your question is similar to what Ms. Newton was asking for in terms of a general overview of what the plan is for how the county would spend American Rescue Plan dollars. So yes, ma'am, that is something that is still part of what the county will be doing, and that's what Ms. Newton was asking about. But that was not discussed as a part of the strategic planning process. Those were kind of separate items, Ms. McBride.
All right, I thought that would have been a part of the planning process. Madam Chair, you want this to be separate from being a part of that overall planning session?
Well, this piece at this moment that I want to, for us to address is to ensure that do we feel as though our incentive program has been effective? And if we feel as though it's been effective, would we like to continue it? Or if we feel that it's not been effective, but we want to do something else? Because later on in the agenda, which is the next item that we're going to cover, we talked about the application process, and when we had the community input and prioritizing projects based upon the community input, then that's going to be the bigger picture where we'll identify projects that we'll put money towards. So that's a later discussion. I think that's where you're headed. Am I?
Yeah, as part of it, yeah, I'm thinking like a really strategic plan going back to ERAP resources and everything, having a full plan in terms of how that funding would be. But the incentive is something that we've already discussed,
Right.
Separate from the other. So that's why I didn't, was wondering whether we continue the extension or wait until we get into that December meeting where we look at the ERAP community resources totally.
That's worthy of a discussion. Yes, ma'am. I would believe so. Yes, Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. So, yes, a few thoughts. One is, my understanding is that based on our previous votes, in terms of what we did with the incentives, that with whatever the gift cards that we have left over, if there was a council member that was doing an event, that those gift cards would be available to them without coming back to council for a motion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Then I think for me, my recommendation would be that we don't necessarily need to take action at this time, but that we come back and have that whole strategic conversation. I mean, I think that we had originally 250 gift cards. I don't know that at any event we ever gave out a lot of them. So I don't know that there's any action that's needed at this time, because it's always something that could come back to the body, whereas we do have these other things, but that's certainly, again, per the protocol that we established, if somebody was going to have an event whenever, that they would use those incentives to try to encourage people to get vaccinated.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the incentive program? Okay, if not, Mr. Brown, I would like to move forward with us talking about that nonprofit application process. And before he gets started, just to kind of set things up before I pass the ball over to him, and that is to be clear, we discussed in previous meetings that we would allocate a particular amount of money or funds for the nonprofit organizations. I've asked Mr. Brown, and this body's asked Mr. Brown, and we've had lots of conversation about creating an equitable process so that it's a fair process, that anyone who would apply would have opportunity, not just for people making their requests known to council members or sending it in to the administrator, but we would have a process by which we could go through. And then from there, identifying what those areas are that we want to fund with the report that hopefully, Mr. Brown, you brought the information as far as our priority, our top priorities for that came out of our community input.
No, ma'am, I did not bring that with me, but I can pull that up. I didn't know that's if you were going to discuss in general, or if you're now trying to set some things in place, considering that the guidance is not final. So I didn't know how we were going to
Oh,
discuss
I just wanted
we can
us to
pull that
have
up.
to note what those
Okay.
items are, so that we could just start to thinking forward to that. And then once the guidance is final, then we would have something standing on ready for us to move forward. So I'll turn it over to you at this time.
All right, so if you give me just a moment here, I can pull up those, the previous update where we listed those items out, so I can remind the committee what those items were. Give me a second here. But while I'm doing that, I can inform the committee that as a part of this process, one of the things that we've done is we do have and have been working with Grant Thornton to develop an application to speak to what Ms. Barron was communicating about the equity of the process. As a part of that, it would be a rubric that would measure, which would measure based off the priorities that the council decides. And that would be a process that would be inclusive of all nonprofits based off of the priorities that council set and how it wanted to decide to put funding. As we go forward, we were concerned about putting out an application before final guidance has been given. In the event that somehow you have people who then come in and apply for something or ask you for something and we consider it and support it, that ultimately is not allowed in ARP utilization. But so that's the general information about that. But again, let me try to pull that up quickly here.
Mr. Brown, if you don't mind, could we have ACA Thomas speak a little bit about her process as far as
Sure.
the application
Yes, ma'am.
that she's been working on?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have been working with Grant Thornton. We did want to be certain that any application that we release to the public does meet all the guidance of ARP, and they have a specific arm that is working with individuals to vet and to basically check the box, if you would, to say that they believe that the project that you're intending to fund is going to be compliant with the federal grant program, which again, we just have to remember that this is a grant. What they anticipate being able to do is once we determine the groups that we would ultimately like to categorize, they would be able to give us a rubric that would actually give us scoring mechanisms that could be used by a committee, whether, I know at one time we had spoken about someone like the Blue Ribbon Committee of community members to actually score these groups independently. Those groups' independent research and analysis would then come back to council in the form of a motion for council to ultimately decide how those dollars would be awarded. If we decided to use a specific amount or award, if you had numerous agencies that were funding one source, it may be that the committee would decide that they would like to, or that it was more appropriate based upon the scoring to fund a specific group over another. So that was the thought behind this. We are hoping that we will have final guidance by the end of the year. That's what the information coming out of Washington right now states. And at that point, because we have been developing at this point, it should just be a matter of doing some more tweaking to actually make sure our application is compliant, and as well that our rubric also gives our committee members clear guidance on how they're going to be vetting these groups. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Ms. McBride.
I recently attended a conference, and I met with individuals from the federal government regarding the ARP grant funding. And even though there's not final guidance, if they approve our application, then they would accept whatever we've done until the final guidance comes along. So you wouldn't have to be worried about having to pay back if they have already approved what was in that application.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Just
That's
some
information.
additional information.
Yes, ma'am, and I understand that for any project that we might have. It's just that the process for my one concern with that, and one that we had sort of talked about as I talked with Grant Thornton, was if we move down the road with vetting community groups, the guidance could come out at some point in time during the evaluation process, because we feel like it should be done by the end of the year. And if that is the case, if it's not done by that time, then I would say after the first of the year, we could go ahead and proceed with our application for community groups. But if we were to do that in the process, given that we're going to have somewhat of a lengthy break, we might find ourselves reviewing some process, and then in the midst of the game, the game may change, or the regulations.
I was just giving you that additional information to say that we would not be on hold forever.
No,
waiting
no,
on
ma'am.
federal
Yes, ma'am.
guidelines.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this information. I guess my only comment is that even once we have an application process for nonprofits to submit requests, I still want to understand how the proposals that they're making fit within our overall plans for how we want to extend funds. So, to use an absurd example that wouldn't apply under these guidelines, but if we have a bunch of proposals from nonprofits saying that they want to do landscaping, whereas landscaping isn't one of our priorities for using these funds, then that's not really helpful. So I understand that we want to create this process, but for me, the overall criteria of what we want to do as a county really comes first, and then them applying for funds really comes second. So I just want to make sure that that's the process we're tracking to.
Yes, ma'am, completely agree, and that is what the consultant recommended. So if you chose certain groups or certain categories of compliant activities at this point in time that you wanted to fund, you could earmark a specific amount of money for each of those, set it aside, and then from that point, you could give staff the ability to go ahead and to look through those applications. Those that don't fall within those criteria could go, once we get those, could then be, we could respond that they did not meet the qualifications. The others could then be vetted.
Thank you. And I guess from my perspective, I'm saying I'm not ready to earmark anything right now because
Right.
I don't feel like we as a county have said these are our overall priorities. So
Yes, ma'am.
thanks.
And so to your point, Ms. Newton, and that's the importance of having this list that the administrator has, because it is direct community input that we can then hear from. This is what the community said, because this is our committee wanted to have input from the citizens. And so now Mr. Brown and his team have already put together the priorities or the top items that came forth. Yes, Ms. McBride.
With the Blue Ribbon Committee, I thought the purpose of the Blue Ribbon Committee was also to look at helping to establish priorities based on income, based on input from the community. and some of our leaders within the community and our regular citizens. So that's how the other Blue Ribbon Committee sort of worked in terms of, and then reviewing the grants coming in once we establish that criteria.
Yes, ma'am. So I thought that it would be helpful if, as a committee, we could set some things in place and then pass it
that's
on
great.
to the to the Blue Ribbon,
Great,
quote unquote,
good.
committee.
So we're saying the same. Great. Thank you.
Mr. Brown?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. So I do have that item that I shared previously, and I'll tell you that these are lists, we put them in priority. We put them in priority based off of the percentages of community response. It wasn't that the staff decided that these are priorities. And so I'm gonna list those out to you. So number one, at 66% of respondents, services for abused and neglected children. Number two, at 65%, street improvements. Number three, at 64.39%, mental health. Number four, at 64%, support services. Number five, at 63%, transitional housing. Number six, at 62%, emergency shelters. Number seven, at 61%, permanent housing. Number eight, at 61%, broadband infrastructure. Number nine, at 61%, services for victims of domestic violence. And number 10, at 57.4% or 58%, veterans. And then there were a number, and I'll mention them here, that were above the 50% range. You had special housing for elderly at 54%, the safety of the neighborhoods or community safety at 54%, youth services at 52%, daycare services at 52%, special needs services 51%, got another 51% at rental assistance, substance and abuse services 50%, and flood and drainage improvements 50%. So based off of that information that we see from the survey, we rank those things, and you heard me say a lot of the same percentage, but I rounded up, but we do have the decimal points for those particular items. That's why they were listed in the order in which I named them. And to the committee's point, there are two items that I believe that my staff would need to kind of move things forward in terms of, how do we process requests, how do we receive requests, what should be included in what we accept. So number one, we talked about, I heard criteria. So we need the criteria that the committee believes that they want focused on, based off the community input or based on any other relationship that you want these funds to be utilized. And then we've discussed another committee of individuals, but we've never said that we want to establish a committee in which we bring in citizens of whatever grouping to participate and be the medium for this process. So those are items that would need to be established to really move this forward. And in terms of recommendations from the administrator, one of the things that I have done is a lot of my things you heard me focus on were internal. And so I want to verbalize this just out of awareness. I know that the committee and council has discussed the desire to utilize this funding in a way to provide support to other agencies to assist the community. We also could utilize these funds all internally to provide support services to areas that could also benefit the community. So the only reason I'm bringing that up is because when you talk about, hey, Mr. Administrator, do you have any recommendations? Understand that what I've done and what I've brought to you were recommendations that I thought were kind of paramount to us to move things forward, and I've kind of done that. But that's why I'm asking for feedback rather than saying, here's the direction we need to move in with the utilization of ARP dollars, because I've already kind of given some of that, and a lot of that is leaning heavily towards gaps that we have internally. But I also understand that the committee has talked about wanting to spend funds also outside of county provided services. So hopefully that's not too much information, but I wanted to share that with you when you think about what other information you might request or need from me.
Any comments or questions for, as it relates to what Mr. Brown just covered? So with that, I think that, Ms. McBride, were you gonna say something? I don't wanna start talking and then.
Might answer my question. I was thinking that there are two separate issues, but it's really one issue. Mr. Brown, you're saying that we need to include some of the administration's priorities, or at least consider those also.
You already have.
And not to forget, we have.
You have considered some of those already. So what
Right.
I'm saying is, you have already done that. And so if you notice, all of my recommendations have been about items that have impacted our ability to provide services to the community. So I was just sharing with you that I have a lot of more items I could do the same thing with, but I understand we talked about having a balance between items that are unique to the county providing services, and then also unique to the community receiving services that maybe not be provided by the
Okay.
county.
I know about the ones that we've already funded.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Okay.
So in addition to those that we have already approved funding for the detention facility, some other things that we've already approved the fund, there are other items that you feel need to be included as we establish these priorities.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's what I want. So we've got two priorities. We still have some from the administration. And then we need to look at the priorities from the community, including the business sector. See, because this is just not, this is a comprehensive Blue Ribbon Committee that will address all those different issues. And so I just wanted to make sure that I was hearing Mr. Brown correctly.
Thank you.
So at this time, what I'd like for us to do is to further our discussion on a couple of items based upon what Mr. Brown has shared with us, and that is we need to move forward with establishing this committee of community members. And so I know based on what I've heard about the Blue Ribbon Committee, but Mr. Livingston, if you could just give an overview of how those individuals were selected to participate on the Blue Ribbon Committee.
All the details, I wasn't directly involved with the Ribbon Committee.
Just a high level is fine.
If I remember correctly, we had staff to send something out to invite people who wanted to participate, and then council ended up selecting those people to participate. That provided. But that's kind of how I got started and proceeded, but I don't remember the details specific about the votes on it and how it took place with council though.
So these individuals came before, or this, where did the list come from? That was
Express interest.
okay. So it was expressed interest from the community
And from council members, right? It was from the community
Council members were appointed.
and council members, and we made sure that we had lay citizens, we had community leaders. It was a real diverse group, in which this group would, I assume, would be the same, but and that's why I mentioned business people, because we need to include the business. But at that time, we were dealing with the flood, so we were getting people related to those issues.
So with that in mind, I think that we probably need to go ahead and establish this committee, and it would take, Mr. Brown, will we need to make a recommendation to full council to establish this committee?
I don't think that you would, but I guess this committee is gonna be a strong advisory committee. So you might want to, because they're gonna be making recommendations on the utilization of these funds. And so I think that the council probably would wanna weigh in because of the nature of their communication.
So given that, I think it would be advantageous for us to have a motion and a recommendation to take before the full body to establish this committee, and whoever takes the motion, I guess you could be creative with what you call the group at this point. But I would entertain a motion to create this committee that would further help us to set priorities as well as throughout this process of the grant system, whether it's awarding grants to businesses or nonprofits, and additionally setting up priorities.
I'll take a stab at it. I move for council to establish a coronavirus Blue Ribbon Committee to assist with the all related, is that ERAP funding?
It's ARP, yes ma'am, American Rescue Plan.
Okay, with all related ARP funding and coronavirus funding that's coming down. And we can clean it up.
Second it.
So you have a motion and a second, and I hope the clerk's office got that. I got most of it.
Okay.
Any discussion? Ms. Newton?
Thank you. So I fully support having this type of group that's providing input. My question / recommendation, I don't know when we would do it, is that that's a group that we would need to create a charter for and understand what is the exact role that we want them to provide and how are we going to interact with them. I know that there have been some other committees, and it wasn't the Blue Ribbon Committee that I'm thinking of specifically, but where they thought they were where there have been groups where sometimes they thought they were decision makers versus recommenders, et cetera. And so fully support it. Just at some point before it's officially launched, we need to put some more structure around it.
Could we to correct that to move to establish a Blue Ribbon Committee for the coronavirus funding that would operate similar with the same criteria established, or similar criteria established for the former Blue Ribbon Committee for the flood. And that's already been established and it worked well.
So that would, are you withdrawing your initial?
Yeah, I'm just
motion?
adding to, I would like to add to that committee will operate like the Blue Ribbon Committee for the flood. And all that has already been established. So make sure that it's an advisory committee.
Thank you. And maybe when that comes before full council, someone could provide some supplemental information just to tell us how it worked, or we can talk about it offline. But just for my information in terms of how once the people were recommended and they applied and were selected, is that something that council just voted on? Did it go through the Rules and Appointments Committee? How did you narrow it down from that really big list to however many you had for your committee?
When it was established, I wasn't here. So, but that, may I speak? Mr. Brown, do you think your staff persons have information on that committee?
Yes, ma'am. My understanding is that, and I'll find out the details, but I did receive notification that that list was largely developed by county council with minimal input from staff. So but I will go back to try to see if we can figure out exactly how, but it was a council-developed list.
It was an advisory committee.
My understanding is they were advisory.
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am. But we'll try to get all the details as much as we can to provide you, Ms. Newton, and members of council.
Thank you.
And so to that point is what we're trying to do here. I know we want to mirror the Blue Ribbon Committee, but do we want to solely take recommendations for this committee from council, or do we want community input, or have people to volunteer for, to say, hey, I want to be a part of this. I would like to, put my name in the hat.
Like you said.
I would agree with you, Ms. McBride, because I think that we may get some individuals that we don't know are out there that would bring great value and worth to this discussion. Mr. Malinowski, you're recognized, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My recollection, of course, is that the chair appointed council members to the Blue Ribbon Committee. I don't recall the exact number of council members, and that individuals that had been negatively affected by the flood back then of course, made the application to want to serve on this committee. I don't know if there was a specific number that we're limited to, but I would make a recommendation, if you can't find this information quickly, Administrator Brown, that you contact former Councilman Greg Pierce, who chaired that committee and has all that information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. I would agree that I think that I would like for this body to, this committee to definitely, let's set some bounds for this committee as a part of a recommendation to council. I think perhaps we say that we want to create a committee of 10. I think that the more structure we can give and as a part of our recommendation, I think we're better off. Yes, ma'am.
You don't have to make a decision on any of that today, right? Because we're going to come back with and establish the criteria based on some of the information that we have, where we can get more information.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I just as we are here, I just want us to definitely put as much information out so that Mr. Brown and his team can have a solid plan as they move forward, as we will probably not reconvene again as a committee until February. And so we want to give them enough during this time that we're not meeting. When we come back for our meeting, that we will have something solid that we can make a recommendation. Oh, really?
Thank you. So I know that we're in the discussion period and we haven't voted on this motion yet, but I'm confused now if your comment was that you were wanting to hold this in committee until we got that information so that we sent something more comprehensive to council, or if you were saying something different.
Well, my initial thought that we would move this forward to full council as a recommendation, and then as we gather information as a part of our recommendation, would be Mr. Brown would be able to give us some of that information that like what you were saying as supporting documents.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? If not, Ms. Only, will you please call the vote?
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Joe Walker,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. So, Mr. Brown, as we are preparing to take this as a recommendation, any information that you can gather, historical data that you can gather that the entire council can have would be great, because it appears that the majority of us were not here when this took place, and it would be helpful to know what the structure was.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Our next item is the ERAP Community Resources. I wanted Mr. Brown to talk a little bit about this. I know I'm not certain if you saw the story that was ran last night on the news addressing, I think they did two things. They addressed a continuous need, but they also did applaud Richland County in awarding over $22 million to its citizens who are been negatively impacted by COVID. So I think that again, Mr. Brown, job well done. However, I think that there's still some things that we are kind of just waiting in the wind for. And as we wait in the wind, what are we doing as a recommendation to assist our citizens?
Yes, ma'am. So to speak to that, and I'll try to sound clearer than I felt like I sounded when they recorded my voice and played it with my mask on. As noted in that actual presentation by WIS, Richland County did request additional funding from the U.S. Treasury. In addition, as confirmed by SC Housing, we met with them and told them of our need and asked them for assistance by participating in a voluntary reallocation of funds. During that conversation, SC Housing thought it would be beneficial to share their desire with the U.S. Treasury to allocate funds. But they also thought that they wanted that to happen from Treasury to Richland County rather than some type of interagency in order to keep everything clean, if you will, or separate. And so as SE Housing mentioned on that video, they, I guess, communicated to the Treasury that they were willing to utilize a portion of their funds to give to Richland County and the other counties that they mentioned. So while we wait on that, what we also will do is anybody that contacts us for resources, we will communicate to them other community resources that they might have access to. Much like the ERA funding, we can't guarantee that another agency can help a citizen, but we can try to connect them with other agencies who have services that they offer. And so that's what we're doing. While we wait on additional funding from the Treasury, we're trying to connect people with other community services that they may have need of, and they may be possibly able to support them. But that's where we are. It is a holding pattern. It is unfortunate. We do have the demonstrated need, but we are reliant on others to provide us funding in order for us to continue with emergency rental assistance.
Mr. Brown, would you speak to the resources that we have posted on our website?
So if you are looking at Richland County's website, and if you are not able to look at Richland County's website, the website, there's a little line right, it's still on the front page on the right side, and it says emergency rental assistance. When you click on that, it takes you to a page, and it says on there that if you've applied for assistance, you can still access your account information through the participant portal. Lets you click there. It also says to call the ERAP management team and list the phone number at 576-3405 on there. It also talks about renters facing eviction or needing immediate assistance should use the county's government and community services resource guide. If you click on that guide, it opens up other community resources that are there that may be available to those citizens who have that need. And then it just talks about the program and what we received and then what we've done with those funds. But that community resource guide when you open it up, is basically a PDF version of information that provides information on transitions, 180 Place, Mercy, Homeless No More, Family Promise of the Midlands, and there are several others on there. And I can list them all if that would be beneficial. Christ Central Ministries, Christian Assistance Bridge, Austin Wilkes, NAACP Housing Navigator, SE Housing, Columbia Housing Authority, Watery Community Action, Cooperative Ministries, Salvation Army. Then
Point
it gives
taken.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Point taken.
Okay, no, I know people that may not be able to see us, or I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Are there any questions about the resources that we are making available, as well as we are in this holding pattern? Any questions to address to Mr. Brown? Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
Brown,
Yes, ma'am.
was there a time frame that SC Housing provided when we might hear back from them?
No, ma'am. It's very similar to what the gentleman said. They believe that the Treasury is taking notice of the request, but no, ma'am, we don't have timelines, and the Treasury generally doesn't give a timeline until they're telling you you're receiving funding in the next so many days.
So, Mr. Brown, when we have an individual calling into our office, are we maintaining a database of those individuals that contact us? So in future, when we get the money, I'm going to be real hopeful that we could reach back out to those individuals.
Yeah, I don't know that we're doing that, so I don't want to say that we are, but I can tell you, for the benefit of those who may be listening and for this committee, that the county received over 14,000 applications. When the county started going through those processes and improving those applications, at the time that we ran out of funds, we hadn't gotten through all of those applications. So one of the things that we communicated is that the first thing is when we get funding, folks that are in process will continue to be processed as though they have need. And once all of those have been exhausted, we will do that before we ever open up any additional applications, because from this program, we've seen the volume that you're going to get, and we know roughly about how far your money can go if everybody is on average getting $5,000 for rental and or utility assistance needs. So I cannot say definitively that we are taking additional information, because I would not even recommend opening up new applications just because we get additional funds, because we have so many that we still need to get through with current needs pending.
Further on ERAP funding? If not, our next item on the agenda is other topics, as, and kind of put this here for as how you all have used it, and that is to identify topics of discussion. And the first item there, Mr. Brown, was an expenditure report.
Sure, I can give you an idea of where we are currently right now. Keep in mind that this does not include the DSS potential project. That project we expect will be somewhere in the potential roughly around a $30 million range, similar to what our other complex was. So not inclusive of that, we have those who qualified under the lump sum distribution amounts, which roughly were about 1.148 million. If you remember, council allowed staff to utilize ARP dollars for applicable agencies that the county normally use grant funding for from its general fund. That's what we're talking about there. So that's about $1.1 million. Employee stipends, that came out to be $7.8 million. Alvin S. Glenn related projects, $3.3 million. The mental health program for the sheriff's officers, $81,000. The utilities bad debt from lost revenue, $1 million. Consulting, that is with Grant Thornton to help us make sure that we have programs that are compliant and also helping us navigate possible programs. That's $100,000 at most. Vaccination gift cards, $25,000 so far. The HVAC, 2020 and 2000, that was $5.2 million. And so far, the total allocated funding is $18,700,000. I'm kind of rounding with those numbers. So that will leave remaining funds just a little bit short of $62 million of the $80 million allotment that the county will receive. One tranche, $40 million we already received. The second one we expect to receive in the future, which brings that total to roughly about $80 million, of which $61 million has not been obligated at this point.
And Mr. Brown, if you could provide an updated, that same report to this committee, and I'm sure all council members would find that helpful as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Newton, this was an item that you wanted to cover. Do you feel as though it's been addressed?
Well, actually, my question was more along where we were in the overall planning process for how we were going to establish priorities. But we've addressed that a little, and I can take the rest of my answers offline.
And we have addressed, which the other item was the plans for the funds to be used and what we plan. I think that what would be helpful is that at our next meeting, we dedicate time for us to just kind of flesh out what we need to, directives for the Blue Ribbon Committee, as well as listing these priorities and the plans for the funding that remains. I think that would be most helpful for us to just dedicate that next meeting as a work session to be able to just work through those things. And if there's nothing else,
There was another other item I briefly
Okay.
mentioned, I just wanted to speak to,
oh,
about the
the-
lobbyists, whatever.
oh, yes, sir, I apologize, please.
What I'm really concerned about is the county not taking advantage of those funds other than the funds that we receive directly, and that is the tremendous amount of state and federal funding regarding ARP and COVID. And at this point, I'm concerned that we really don't have anybody to advocate on our behalf to get those funds. You know, every other community I talk to and folks I meet, they already even, you know, some are talking about commitments they have from the legislation and other folks and so forth. We don't have that. We have not had a lobbyist in some time now. We need somebody to advocate on our behalf. And I would strongly suggest that we charge our administrator with just simply looking into some means of getting someone to advocate on our behalf as soon as possible. All those decisions, by the time we get back, half of those decisions, well, most of those decisions will be made. I think I could, you know, we are currently still under an emergency procedures here. The administrator can do that through our procurement office to get something done as quick as possible if he needs to. We need to instruct him, I think, to at least look into that so we can be prepared as the legislature move forward in terms of making decisions about how they're going to allocate those funds. Because right now I think we're significantly behind the ball based on my conversation with legislators and so forth. And you may recall not long ago, one legislator in the paper said, you know, we asked the question why we didn't get funding equal to what another county received, and he clearly said, nobody talked to me. There's no advocate for Richland County. So I think that's something we really, really need to do. That we're talking about a tremendous amount of money.
All right.
Just wanted to add too, as you know, I'm really active with NACO, and I've talked to a number of council members from throughout the United States, and I must agree with Mr. Livingston. A number of counties are receiving money, and they do have lobbyists, which is a normal procedure. But I'm also concerned about, Mr. Brown, us having a grants writer. And I know that right now we are in a crunch in terms of the amount of work that the grants department has to do. Even if we have to consider staff is not overworked, and that we can be able to apply for these funds coming.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. And I think, Mr. Livingston, I'm not 100% sure, but, and I can look into what you said about other methods of procurement. I think the last time the item was before council, it might have actually been deferred, if not voted down. I'm not sure which one, but I can go back and take a look, because if it's deferred, then maybe, you know, there's some movement quicker there. But if not, then we can see what I can do under my emergency authority associated with the pandemic, and don't have a problem doing that at all.
Speak to that, Mr. Brown. That was just a general lobbyist for
Sure.
anything and everything we might do. This time, we may just need to, you know, get someone for a short period of time just to be specific dealing with COVID, for example. Because I think at that time we were talking about, like I said, we've gotten rid of, or we did not extend the contract of a lobbyist at that given time, so we just didn't do anything. But right now, my main focus is on getting those ARP funds. You know, not so much a lobbyist or everything else, because that might take some time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe three to follow up on that. So one is that I certainly support us having someone who advocates on our behalf. I guess I would just want to make sure that in addition to authorizing the administrator, I don't think this has to be some sort of, I don't know how formal this needs to be, but someone who's going to lobby on our behalf has to have directives from us on what they're going to lobby for and what our priorities are. So that's just information that we need to just make sure that we're providing. Again, I don't know that it has to be some regimented committee process or how we do it, but we just want to make sure that we're providing that guidance. And then just as it relates to, yeah, I'll just leave my comment there. Thank you.
if I'm hearing correctly, we all are in agreement that definitely there's some funding that we're missing out on. And so, Mr. Brown, and I don't think that you need anything further from this committee to do what has been requested of you.
No, ma'am, I will be seeking, how we can get somebody to advocate on behalf of Richland County. And once that person is procured, I will notify the council. And I have some general ideas, but then speaking to what Ms. Newton said, the lobbyists would obviously need to have some ideas from beyond the county administrator.
So directly to that point, as you work through the procurement process, then depending on how quickly things move because of the holidays, that's why it's advantageous for us to reconvene, so that we can have this work session, so that we can give some further directives to the lobbyists. I don't think that we want to send them out there just cold without any list of priorities or the types of funding that we are hoping to get. Ms. McBride?
While you have a lobbyist, we can give some direct. That's why we have the lobbyists, because they're out there looking at all of the different programs and funding that is available. So the general directions is good, but we don't want to just tie that person down when you do the research and find the related areas.
Further? I do want to recognize our colleagues that are here with us, Councilwoman English, Councilman Pugh, and Malinowski. Thank you all for being here. Our last item on the agenda is adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Only?
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Joe Walker,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion